and I saw the other ways understanding was used, and I was like, oh, my definition doesn't include that, so I just expanded it, and it ended up being, I don't know, this is kind of mainly focused on this one, I think. So but it just feels so long, like as if that is a definition. Understanding is identification of a concepts or propositions, reference to reality and implied context in use, or identification of a principle applicable to some perception of an event. It's like, what a mouthful, as if that helps you in any way. Like,
yeah,
obviously it's better than using what you learn, but it's like, it's just like, it doesn't, I don't know how effective this will be either.
Yeah, wording them is always tricky. I don't know any particular rule of how to word it other than you try to identify the wider category in it, and then the distinction. It's a wider category of understanding is what, or how did you define it?
Identification, which is the same as your word, which is grasp.
Okay, the identification of, and what was the narrower? Okay, ask the genus that includes all the select examples.
So identification was the genus.
Identifying perceptual or conceptual data that, as the fundamental, what fundamentally differentiates the grasped, the data which is grasped as reference to reality, which I feel like you can specify the differentiation better. What's the distinguishing feature? That seems a bit vague either way you wrote it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I was thinking. So one is obviously the most important is really what's the referent to reality. But off the thread that we wrote about the cook, who like, if you say he's good, there's an implied context. So when someone says, do you understand what he means? You must know what the context is. Okay, they're just basing it off like the past 3 meals or whatever, and it's not a formal rating. The standard is kind of just what they feel like. So but that's not in the word. There's no referent in the word that tells you that. It's an implied context. And then the other part was, if someone says to you, do you understand the meaning of the Holocaust or whatever, that's an event. There's no way you can understand the meaning of an event unless you're referencing that event to some principle. And so that's what I try to capture and this is just by reading. I was like, oh, well, my definition doesn't capture that. It doesn't capture that. And then I tried to add it. But it's like, yeah, it's definitely too much like that. I don't see how it's better than using what you know, but it's still too much.
So. Well, for one, it's probably not perceptual. Grasping conceptual information in such a way that you can identify the referent and in the context. I mean, that's how I would think of it almost.
What about, but then it's not just conceptual data that you're understanding. When you are understanding, you could say to someone, let's say you're walking down the street and there was once a philosophy store, like, and it sold lots of books in your street. Okay.
Yeah.
And now they went out of business and now there's a liposuction clinic that replaced them. You could say, do you understand the significance of this? And that is a concrete thing you're looking at, but you can relate it to some wider principle.
I would think that's still conceptual. Yes, you're talking about something perceptual, but to make an inference like that, to understand what it suggests as far as like, oh, it went out of business, like that would be conceptual because you're trying to identify what about this information, what it tells you more abstractly You're not just saying like, you don't just, the image, the actual sight of it isn't telling you anything. You have to use concepts to
That's
make it
right.
into something of understanding. At least when we say it, like, we're not really saying like a bird understands what it means. They still see it just like you, but they don't know what it means because they have no conceptual mechanism to do so.
Right. But there is that thing of when you see an event, or like, okay, let's go to the fountainhead. When Rourke speaks to the dean and the dean says, oh, that's just the way we do things here, something like that. Like, that's the way it's always been done. Buildings, because everything good has already been done. Rourke says, there's something here I don't understand, in the way the dean is behaving, or something like that. And so that's another example of like, there's no concept being communicated, but there is something in the event, like there's some principle he's trying to identify, which he either doesn't have or doesn't occur to him. And so that's another way to say, do you understand what just happened? Like, you're talking about an event, you're talking about perceptual stuff that happened, not a concept. You're trying to find a concept to relate that event to, but you're talking about the event. So I was trying to capture that. That's what I'm trying to.
I mean, if you're just trying to, well, I'm capturing like saying him saying, I don't understand that idea. I think that just is being able to take the, well, take the information. Well, the reason I wouldn't say you're grasping, okay, let me take a step back. Okay, you can say you consider grasping perceptual or conceptual data, or I'd rather say information. Data could have other implications, but well, I'll just go with this. Grasping perceptual conceptual data. Okay, that's your starting point. That's what you have, and this what you're thinking about. So from there, I think I understand what you're saying better. So from there, that's the information you have. And then what would it mean to understand that information? Well, it would be to, I don't know, ability to identify context, ability to identify reference, and ability to integrate it into your context of knowledge. I'm not sure which one to go with, but by thinking about it, we can go with one of those. Because when Rourke said that, it'd be like, oh, I can't put it into what I understand about the world. I can't integrate it. I don't understand it.
Right. Okay, I'll think
Or
about
like,
that.
I
I'll
can't,
just.
something to that effect. Like, you're right about the genus there, grasping that data. And you could try to make it more concise, what you're trying to identify. That makes it unique
Yeah,
or
I
makes
guess
it
it's
different.
the fundamental after a lot of the thing I'm not liking so far is a lot of my definitions are like this, and it just seems like there's all this, they're not all related to a few things. There's just all these random abstractions they go to, and then it's, see if I can find one that I did before as well. um See another one that might. Maybe I'll leave it to next time. I'll
Yeah.
organize more, but yeah, we'll see how this works out. All right, get rid of that. And do you remember we spoke about this quote about independence and picking, like, if the market sets the term, the question of, is that
Yeah.
secondhandedness? And I found this quote, um, and I thought it was kind of relevant, because it relates to, the great businessman is like a great musician or a great man in any field. The composer focuses on creating his music. His goal is to express his ideas in musical form, the particular form which most gratifies and fulfills himself. If the audience enjoys his concerto, of course he's happy. There's no clash between him and his listeners. but his listeners are not his primary concern. His life and exercise of his creative power to achieve his own self-satisfaction. He could not function or compose otherwise. If he were not moved by a powerful personal selfish passion, he could not wring out of himself the necessary energy, effort, time, and labor. He could not endure the daily frustrations of the creative process. Okay.
Yep.
Now, think about this composer analogy. What if you had a composer who's like, the market likes this kind of music, I'm going to make that kind of music? Isn't that the same thing suddenly as the second-handedness? Because that's what the businessman is doing in a lot of cases, right?
Phrased that way, I would say yes, it is second-handed.
But I think that's a lot of the time what a lot of businessmen are doing, which would then be, there's no, I don't know. I'd need to think about it more, but it does seem,
I mean,
how much
I
pleasure
think
do you need to get? Like, what kind of pleasure do you need to get out of it? I'm not too sure where the line is.
we have to reason out about, say, well, thinking about these other aspects of it, organization, management, planning. I mean, that's really the key thing. Like, sure, you can make the product because what people want. I mean, that in itself might not be second-handed. If that was like, see, a person makes movies, they only did it because it was popular, it's what the
Yeah.
audience wanted, or they only create a computer because it's merely that is popular. They didn't care about anything else about it.
Right.
I mean, but we would think about, say, the quality of the business person. Are the better ones maybe those that are into like deeper things than merely the satisfying their customers? I mean, that could be an aspect of it. There's nothing wrong with satisfying somebody, but you would have to consider what are their primary concerns. Like, are they really just doing it merely because other people like it, and that's as far as their thinking goes? Are they really thinking this deep into it? I would say even the business people that I like, they do think deeper than just, oh, my people like it, or this is what the people want.
That's true, but I don't think that's the only, like, I don't think a second-hander would be someone who only considers, because I don't think anyone only considers what other people want. I think, take Winan, for example. He's wanting power for himself. He is wanting something for himself. And he sees the best way to get there, power or money, whatever, replace it with whatever you like. And he sees the best way to get there is selling newspapers. And so I do wonder if, um, like that example, let's say you're saying silk underwear are popular. So you start up a store to sell silk underwear, and your interest is money. So you do have an interest and you enjoy making money. And so how much of that is, because isn't that exactly what Weiner did? Isn't that exactly what uh, what's his name, Keating did as well? Like, Keating had a perceived selfish interest in pursuing, he wanted fame or he wanted money. I don't really remember, but there's still, it's not enough just to be purely, like, you can't even approach something and be purely selfless and say, how can I serve others? So I think, what are your thoughts on that? There's no one who does that. There's more people who want something. They
But the
do want
fact that
something for themselves.
it's primary though. But yeah, I mean, yes, you'll have different degrees. Maybe you'll have moments where they don't act that way, but it would seem if that is their primary concern, it's what do the people want, then I don't think they could get at something like at actual self. Like, you're not actually serving your flourishing or self. It isn't, you want yourself to be primary. It's not saying that these things can't be in there. Like, yeah, you could care a lot about what people like depending on the business, but it shouldn't be it shouldn't be primary. The primary should be like however you're trying to integrate it into how does it serve my life and things like that. Then that's fine. It's just maybe if you don't think about it and you say, oh, what the customer wants is more important than what I want. Like what I want matters, but the people are more important, or my
Right.
views on how to make the product are relevant is what the people want. Which, yeah, I'm sure some people might argue, well, you should care what most people want. And that's what makes the market work, is that they give the people what they want. But then you could argue, well, it's not about what giving the people what they want, but being able to use our productivity in a beneficial, helpful way to ourselves. And that brings, and that's the type of thing that creates those benefits of capitalism. It isn't that we're caring for each other for some utilitarian reason. It's not like I'm doing this just because it brings the most happiness to the most people. You're trying to think of it like I'm after making my own flourishing, my own well being. And that's the primary interest. If I can help other people, and incidentally, that's great, but that's not my main reason for doing it. That's really what this is saying.
So then someone who selects, let's say someone who approaches career selection using multiple criteria, but the first one is money. Like they list careers. Okay, here are 5 careers and they all earn a lot of money. So I'm going to focus on those. That I would say that's others as a primary matter, because money is set by a market, which is set by other people's values. And then you're saying that's the primary, right? Wouldn't that qualify as second-handed?
I mean, if that is the number one reason you're doing it, then sure.
The
I mean, I'm
primary.
trying
So
to,
there may be other reasons. Yeah, I don't know how like, because you have people who do that, and they do approach by, okay, here are jobs
yeah.
that earn money. And then after that, they consider, okay, well, I'm kind of interested in this thing, and I like, I might be interested in, using a computer. So I'm just going to do this. But it seems like primary is the money. And then that would qualify, from what I understand, as second-handed.
If you're not thinking of, if you think of money in that very narrow way, just merely having that, the money, not for any other reason, then yeah, sure. I would agree that it's second-handed.
Right. Okay. Gotta think about that one more too.
The difficulty is, would it, can you do something that, well, about the money, it seems that money is a good motivator. It can be a good reason to do things, and it stands for a lot of things, but it can only stand for your, I would argue that you can only stand for your values and productivity and the value you bring, the added value you bring to the world. Then um, if you understand that, you need to already understand that you have to act in your self-interest as far as um, business ventures, and like what you want to create should go along with your values. The reason you're creating is not to serve them, but to some other end that goes towards your life. It would really depend on the specific job, because I probably could conceive of a job where money is primary, or the major element of it, but not the sole reason you get into it. Like as far as investment goes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Money is in investments. That is the scoreboard. Okay. Hmm.
It might change though if like you're not doing it as a career though. That's different. Like if it's, it's temporary, or yeah, if it's temporary, that's where it gets really tricky, I think.
Yeah,
Say if you're
agree.
getting a job you want to go into, it's just, let's say 5 years, because you need money for, because you're going to school and you need some extra boost to pay for things. You can't necessarily pursue it the same way. I mean,
Yeah, I
could you
agree.
do it primarily there just for the job, but then understanding you end up somewhere else? I'm not really sure. But as far as like your major careers, it would easily fall into the, yeah, it shouldn't be like, oh, it's what the people want, it's what the consumers want. It's like your life passion, your reason for getting up in the morning, then yeah, you really should put yourself first and thinking what you're achieving as the primary. You could consider all the other things, but it's yourself that's first.
Yeah, I still don't know. I need to think about it more. I think there's some underlying principles that will then, because there was that essay, how to anatomy of compromise, or how to, like
Yes.
if two people negotiate price, there's no, the underlying principle, moral principle of trade is intact. Whereas if there's, a thief that comes to you and you negotiate to give him less, whatever that was the example, and then you've compromised the principle. But then what the principle in this case is, and like what exactly independence looks like, is less clear to me. So, but I think with time, maybe I'll.
Yeah, we should move on from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we discussed that. Why, like the desert island analogy, I think, right? Where,
Yes.
yeah, okay, we weren't
Very
sure.
common.
Yeah. Is it common? A lot of people bring that up as.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So maybe before you read it, maybe you'll know. Okay. So secondhander is the concept. It's someone who relies on other people. It's still not actually, but let's say relies on other people. Why is the power? I don't get why power luster is the worst. They're both dependent on other people, but do you know why he's the worst?
Why is he worse than? I'm trying to think what other kinds there are. I mean, I guess
Yeah, I don't know what other kinds of secondhanders there are.
Keating, I guess, but power luster, like, yeah, why was?
Well, Wynand is considered a power luster, I think.
I
But I don't. To be honest, the distinction isn't even clear to me. So,
well, which distinction?
secondhander dependent on someone, power luster dependent on someone, but wants things for himself. But so does secondhander. So,
Well, power luster doesn't mean power over others. Is that what it's saying?
well, yeah, I wasn't sure, but if you're not, that's okay. We don't need to
read this. Let me read it.
So the man-made becomes men become the primary way which you deal with reality. That's the abstraction. I don't.
I'm pretty sure it means power over others here, as
Okay.
power luster.
Right.
That you only desire than being better than the man-made. Like you're still judging in comparison to the man-made. I think the argument would be that using that you want to force others, I think is the implication. Rand's using a power luster would want to force others to bend to their will. And that's almost worse than just trying to adapt to their standards, but you're trying to deny the very foundation of existing in a society that we can act on our own choices. I mean, at least a second-hander might not use force on someone, though. Still, on some level, permit a person to live by their own choice and own volition. A power luster would prevent that. At least I think that's what Rand would be saying here. That's why it would be worse to be a power luster.
Okay. So you think it's the physical, you think it's power luster, she means physical, someone who's physically forcing.
Yeah.
Got it.
Or manipulating.
Got it. Oh yeah, as children, wouldn't children be considered secondhand, or we're using this concept only for an adult conceptual consciousness, really?
Yeah. It's just to refer to people that maybe as a policy only always take the consciousness of others as like the deciding factor,
Right.
or that's how they make
Which
decisions.
that's once you can think for yourself as opposed
Yeah.
to a kid who
I mean, a child would at least like,
is dependent on
they
others.
still understand that they're not just relying on people for their thoughts at all, but like relying in the sense that like, oh, you need to help me eat or you need to help me learn. It's not like their consciousness is dependent. It's just that their physical means of survival are, and they
Yeah.
need assistance, but it's not like they have a policy of abandoning their decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, yeah, this is where I really have trouble, and I still don't get it, to be honest. Like when they talk about the parasite or is about principles again, like, they're saying the parasite cannot justify his own default, but he does not want to do the necessary work. He does not want to exert the effort that an independent creative existence would require. I'm bolding the relevant stuff. Such a person is not always a passive type. He may struggle, act, even make a certain kind of long range plan and figure out the means of implementing it. Example, he may spend years planning how to rob or enslave a nation. Within the framework of the parasite's life, struggle does not represent a commitment to focusing on reality or to being guided by his conceptual faculty. Like I honestly don't really follow this, because like when I think someone spending years to rob a bank, like I think of effort. I don't think of like mindless drift.
Yeah.
I think of someone like planning, being precise, trying to develop principles for theft. I don't know if I'm wrong, but that's what I think of. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem very like uh drifting and
Yeah.
non-committed to focusing on reality or concepts. So what am I, do you think, is this something that you have struggled with or thought about?
It seems a bit extreme, this wording, because um, I do think it takes effort to do those things. I would say it's more that I don't think I could say more than they are rejecting or don't care about the effort it took to create these things that they want to steal, that their stealing is dependent on somebody having made something to steal. Stealing isn't any means of production. It's only taking what's already been created. So I think that would be fair to say that they aren't putting in the effort to acquire value, to seek value and get value. Rather, they're merely taking the value as it's been produced without the need, without any of the effort required to produce that value. So the only effort we're talking about, it's not like there's no effort. I don't think it's
Yeah.
fair for Rand to say it doesn't qualify as effort. It just doesn't qualify as value producing effort. There's no value positive element of stealing, even if you desire to steal. You're not creating something new. You're not manufacturing something new. You're just, it's already been created by someone else. And now you take it without having any part in creating it.
Right. What are your thoughts on, like, I've often heard that part of the formulation of evil here in this context is like evil is non-thought and the irrational. But I don't see how, like, I can see how over a whole life, uh, one irrational decision after another may eventually lead you to a bad place, like, and that includes
Yes.
violence. But I could also see that someone who is rational, like, I just don't, I'm not really clear on why someone who is rational can't also just decide to be violent or can't also just make a decision to do something with physical force in a
Well,
negative way. Like it's not clear to me why if you think you will suddenly end up, oh, other men have rights and therefore I should respect their rights, but as opposed to think and go, oh well, if I can steal and get away with it, like what, and that still to me would seem like a focus, and I'm not clear on that. You know, what are
I
your
would say
thoughts
it's
on?
because when Rand says irrational, she would usually mean not that there's no logic in their thinking or no concepts in their thinking, but it's irrational because it's the improper standard of value. They're taking something that isn't. There is no standard they're using that involves life. There is no way to judge that something is rational or not. She's not just saying rational as in you've thought about it, but rational as in is it integrated with a goal or a standard. And at least based on the way Rand has conceived of morality, you either choose going towards your life or you don't. So you always have the alternative. And we can only frame these moral questions as like if you want to live a flourishing life, if you want to live by your nature, you must do these things. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So it's irrational because it's not going to the one alternative that leads to morality. It's just there's everything else. Does that make sense?
Some of it. Were you saying that? I just didn't follow all of it. Were you saying that in this case, to be rational doesn't mean to think or not, or doesn't mean to use logic or not? It means to adopt life as a conscious, explicit standard of value?
Yes, and the reason why you can't just say, oh, it's rational, but I mean, attempting to live life by this as this live life with life as the standard, you're acknowledging that fundamental alternative between existence or non-existence. All your choices can only go one way or the other. So either you desire to go towards life as the end, flourishing as your end, or non-life. And those are the only alternatives. So if you're thinking rationally, you're going towards flourishing or trying to, or really wanting to, versus life isn't your standard value. So it's not any sense rational. It's not leading to that standard. The only way to judge something as rational or not is with some standard of life. You need that
Um,
basis for judgment. Otherwise, you're just saying, is it consistent or not? Which isn't the same as it benefiting this end as it should.
let's go back to, do you mean implicit or explicit, holding it an implicit or explicit standard? Because it would seem like a lot of people, I can see a scenario,
Let's say
basically
implicit.
everyone in the past was, let's say implicit.
Implicit is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
okay.
we would be just conflating like just because somebody doesn't know something, then everybody was rational. It's like at least
Right.
that's the
Yeah, I agree.
implicit that they were seeing it in some form or another, and they saw it like maybe early Christians, especially. I think they probably really wanted a good life, and that is why they followed God or whatever. It's not because of some the belief in the arbitrary or something, but they genuinely desired trying to live for their best life, and they might believe in God and that'd be a mistake, but their mind is in the right place, so to speak. That they're the wrong, the right standard at least. They're thinking about their life, and that's really what counts. If they don't identify explicitly, it's unfortunate, but they're doing the right thing overall. They have the right attitude.
So you don't think, because I thought the formulation was focus is what leads to the good, non-focus is what leads to the evil.
Well, I'd say at a minimum, it's necessary but not sufficient.
Okay.
If you don't focus, then you're not going to get anything. If you're focused, well, it's a start.
Right, but you can
But you
still
can
be
focus on the
evil.
evil or
You can
something.
still do something evil, objectively evil, if you're in focus.
Yeah, it just like you might say that these thieves are in focus even and thinking logically, but are they really implementing it in life as a standard of value or even implicitly? I mean, I could imagine criminals that they were doing it for the wrong reasons and they made some big mistake, but
Yeah.
they reformed themselves or whatever.
Right.
It would be different if like a career criminal like Al Capone. Yeah,
Right.
I'm sure he's be in focus, threaten people the right way, get people to do what he wants when he wants, but life really wouldn't be a standard of value. It's
But then
just
that would, to me, that would reverse and contradict the statement she made. Because I see it the same way as you do. These people can't, like, I don't see why they have to, they're just like, they get to that place by characteristically not being in focus. That's what I'm confused about. Because she says that, you know, there's parts of her text where she writes about evil being impotent and smutty and small and all that because it's the non-focus. But like you, I see, yeah, like Al Capone, like you can't run a criminal organization by being out of focus.
yeah.
You can't spend years robbing a bank by being out of focus. Like there's something off that I don't get there. But
Yeah, I don't think I'm able to integrate her thinking either. It just doesn't seem
yeah, okay.
correct. It doesn't seem to fit with what her motive is in describing a moral theory. It just seems to be a bit short-sighted. Like, yeah, some criminals will be petty and not think and not be focused. Maybe most are, but I can't say every criminal will be. And I can't even say the most famous criminals are out of focus. I mean, they're not rational. I'll agree with her on that. But I can't really say that there's no focus or it's empty or it's non-thinking. I mean, it's some kind of thinking. It's just not the right thinking.
Yeah,
The moral statement.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's my trouble with, and then because that whole, I don't buy into that. It's not clear to me why, you know, evil is the non-thinking and that, because like I do see potent evil.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
think a lot of evil is pretty impotent and non-thinking. And I think non-thinking will always be impotent and probably evil. But I could think of like the lower lackeys in a mob organization. They probably don't think much. They just do what they're told or act in a very primitive way and don't think ahead. And they are reliant on what they're told to do
right.
that they themselves aren't thinking. I think that would probably be the average. That's why crime syndicates aren't necessarily all over. They exist, but
Yeah.
it's not like you find them all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um,
I'm not even sure man would say Tui was non-thinking.
yeah, that's the
So
other part I had trouble. Too, he's like not painted as he does that. You know, he was apparently supposed to be inefficient and, but yeah, exactly. He's thinking, and he does seem to have a lot of success in
yeah,
destruction. And to
yeah,
me, that does seem to be like a potent thing. Not that I aspire to be a Tui, I wouldn't want to, but like that seems powerful that he's got that. It doesn't.
yeah,
It kind of conflicts with the this image of it, evil being smutty and small. To me.
yeah.
Um, okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously something to think about more deeply there. I don't really get it. I don't get evil in general. So it's okay, let's see what this is. Neither reason nor logic can be defined in terms of context dropping. What uh sorry, I don't really, do you know what given the context of what this might mean? Defined in terms of context dropping. What would that mean?
Um,
What does it mean to
um,
define something in terms of context dropping?
neither reason nor logic can be defined. I mean, you can't. I mean, reason without. Well, I think about reason at least. I can say is what I was saying about. It implies you need a standard of value. That you can't drop that context of there being a standard of value. And if you did, it's like it's not reason really that you're talking about. You can't really define it that way because you're ignoring the context with which it was defined or understood, the context where you formed the concept anyway. Like you can't form the concept reason without understanding that life is the center of value, at least implicitly.
But you don't need life. You don't need life as the standard of value for reason. So I don't really. Well, let's try logic. What about logic then? Like, what would it mean to define logic in terms of context dropping?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fine.
Or I just want to think about reason there, like,
Yeah.
um, or at least you need some kind of standard, because to say it's something reasonable, I think people usually mean that their thinking is towards some goal or some end. And if you form a concept of reason based on seeking an end, you can't get rid of that end seeking aspect of reason. You can't divorce it. I don't know if you can form a concept of reason without understanding, at least implicitly, that some aspect of living is the point of it. That reason is understood in terms of living life a certain way.
But wasn't reason formed in ancient, like, wasn't the idea of reason formed in ancient Greece, and they just thought it was a disconnected thing you do to like,
Um,
um, you know,
I don't
it was like a
really,
higher thing that was disconnected from life.
I
So
don't really think so. It's Socrates, even if it was disconnected, he still wanted like living the life of the proper citizen. Like, even if it
yeah,
was divorced, it was still some kind of I'm doing this for the way I think and act.
right.
It might
Yeah,
be
okay.
all weird, but it's still in some sort of flourishing or better quality of life or something like that. Even if it
Yeah,
wasn't life per se, like you're saying, a better quality for your soul, your existence,
right,
your ego, whatever it might be.
right. Okay. Uh, okay. I think this is we might skip this because it's one of those psychological ones. So you've probably seen this in Brandon, the independent the rebel, the one who
Yeah.
rejects people
Yep.
because they believe something. But I guess my question was where I don't see that I want to, but I never managed to read like all these characterizations they give throughout the book. I've never seen anyone like that. And I've never met anyone like, at least as far
Let's
as I'm
see.
aware. And so that's what I'm like, where do they get these from?
This one, let's see. Didn't take part in independence.
Whoops. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. The kind of mentality which poses as being courageous represents an especially that like I don't know where all these that's what I want to know because I'm like, well, if this is a character, if this is a kind of aspect of character that is exists or is common, it'd be cool to see that in other people, but I just don't.
Yeah, I think I could come up with one, but I am curious what Rand is thinking of.
This is
Like, I just
Peacock, by the
wanted,
way. This is all from
or
Peacock.
what Peacock, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm still curious what his example is. I'm thinking
Yeah.
he needs at least one example for me to. Yeah, this is very odd. It's not impossible. Let's see. Being independent, really. Saying I am complete. Maybe someone who I like can think of as people who are um, have an inflated sense of thinking ability, like achieving a certain rank in academia, but then that rank alone is like, oh, look how maybe more like somebody who abandons what's popular to say, oh, I'm such a free thinker. I'm rejecting all the common norms. I'm rejecting everything because I'm so independent. And then all you other posers out there, you're nobody. You don't really know what it means to be independent. I'm really independent because I don't I don't take it from the man at all, or something like that. I can think of. Have you read Catcher in the Rye?
I think I tried to and I threw it out. So
Well, Holden Caulfield in that, like he's like so like he hates everyone really, but he tries to act so independent, or he calls everyone a phony. He's like he's
okay.
the only one who sees himself as genuine, everybody else is fake. Like
Right.
he's always acting on he's independent, but really, and everyone else is a phony.
Right. But is the like most of the dialogue and thought is based on other people. So like I am this, they're that kind of thing, right?
I,
Rather than this
as I
is right.
recall,
Right.
as I recall, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
only
It
example I
is
can think of.
right. It is really interesting because like I don't think this is all just made up, but I have that experience of whenever I read the characterizations in throughout Opa or even some Brandon, it's so disconnected. Like I'm not able to, I haven't recognized any of that in anyone I know. And so it's
Examples
interesting.
would
I'm
be
like,
nice.
yeah, but even the examples they give, like even
True.
Brandon gives an example. And for me personally, I don't go, oh, yeah, I know I've met that person like that. I remember this. And I can see that when I meet this person. I don't have that experience at all. And it makes me think of, apparently fiction is supposed to help you do that, which I try to read more of. But yeah, I'm just curious because I don't have that experience when I'm seeing these kind of like, I'm able to judge people in this way. So
I think Brandon was Nathaniel Brandon was kind of critical of that way of thinking. Like Rand um, didn't know enough about psychology, and she even admitted that herself to me
right,
when he thinks it like lack of psychology, both in terms of developing concepts and I guess about how people think,
right,
can make it hard to judge people correctly, or you're not given the
right,
right tools to judge.
right,
That like sure, don't be independent, but how do you do that? And how does
right,
one achieve that psychologically? I know you should do it, but how? And that's kind of what Brandon was critical of. Like we know we should do, but there's not much how to it.
right. Yeah,
And then you
exactly.
maybe end up just we go by the play fast and loose with concepts of how other people think. But we could definitely be more precise than Peikoff is being, and than Rand is being.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see what this is. The producer exercises his own best judgment regardless of the momentary notions or passions of the crowd. The more economically successful he becomes. I don't.
That's what I was trying to say myself about why it isn't secondhand, but like create things for others, like as a business person. Like why would it be okay to be secondary as far as like why isn't it secondhanded to put a lot of like consider the passions of the crowd?
Right. Um, yeah, I mean, I when I read this, I just know people who like their business is appealing to the passion of the crowd and it works. They're very economically successful.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, okay, I guess you can do it both ways. But um, the reason I'm trying to tear this all apart is because like I don't want to go into the direction of this just being all these ideals set up, but do they actually
Right.
like does this work in practice? You know what I'm saying? Because then you can fall into that trap of being that tortured idealist again. And so
Yeah.
if there's anything thrown out there, I'm like, well, prove to me it's true. I'm not gonna just, if the whole idea is that I'm supposed to have the best life for myself according to this philosophy, then I'm not gonna just follow some random thing that I don't understand or believe.
If you want to think more about it, I would suggest trying to list out to yourself particular companies or particular people that you think, I don't know, like particularly admirable companies that might fit in this idea of making a lot of money, or what are companies that matter a lot to you, and
Right.
think about how they function.
Right.
Like I like thinking about Tesla a lot, but that's what I personally would go to think about what does it mean to be productive in a company. But or you could pick whatever company you think speaks a lot to you of what like you think is successful, is good, is doing the right thing generally, and then consider them. Like look at what they do, who's in charge, what's their policies, things like that.
I think maybe a distinction to make, it's a good idea. And maybe another distinction to make is there's one thing to consider the the momentary notions and passions of the crowd and take them into account. It's another to act on your own, like, so it's one thing to consider and act on your own judgment versus act on the momentary notions or passions of the crowd, So there's that.
Yes.
You can take them into account and then still act on your own independent judgment. Yeah, okay. All right, so I will probably keep that in mind another time and make a connection when I read stuff in the future. Yeah, so this is about how we're not actually independent when we trade. No, we are independent. It's often said that no one is independent. I've definitely heard this before because we all rely on others. The grocer supplies me with bread. Do you pay your grocer or do you offer him only a sub-story? The term dependence in its pejorative sense cannot be stretched to subsume both these policies. Those who find this distinction difficult to grasp and who prattle about the interdependence of our complex society may seek further clarification. I was the one who was like, oh, this is interdependence. I'm the prattling one. Okay. I think the trouble I'm having with this is maybe the concept of dependence, because I get that there's a distinction when you pay someone, but I still my brain still keeps going to like, well, it is true that like I still depend on him for my survival though, and so,
yeah, I mean, to me, interdependence.
I think I need to clarify that the
word.
concept dependence.
I don't know what she is.
Yeah.
I don't see how interdependence contradicts Rand's claim or Peikoff's claim here.
Right.
I mean,
I guess it depends on the concept dependence, that how you're using it.
I would say in the sense that you're dependent on, say, the productivity of others, in the sense that you can only live the sort of life you live if other people also produce.
Right.
And if they exchange with you.
Yeah.
You can't do it alone.
Yes.
You can't make a whole capitalist society literally alone.
Yeah.
But you can't do it for the sake of others. It's like you're both. I guess dependent can be a weird word. So we can say we are mutually supporting. Might be a better way to phrase it.
Right. I think, yeah, it is definitely a tip off. Now that I've gone through Ido, it's a tip off. Like, okay, when you get stuck like that, then there's probably different senses in which the word dependent is being used. And the concept isn't clear in my mind. Because if I try and summon up what comes first, let me just think. Dependence is when you need someone to do something. Let's just go with that. Like, so you can see the trouble there if that's the form I hold dependence in, right?
Yeah.
So I think I will. It's a good example.
I'm really distinguishing dependence as a requirement to exist, or like to depend on. Like without them, you wouldn't live.
That's a necessity.
That's usually how it's necessity
too, right? Yeah. I'm going to put that down in my little sheet of conceptual organization. Mm-hmm. Dependence. Yeah, because if that's your definition, you need something in order for a certain outcome. That would be also the concept necessity, and need. So dependence and need, but there are distinctions to be made, right? Like we can talk about the need of, I don't know, what's a good example? The need of North Korea for nuclear bombs. But that's different from the need of like, there's a difference there between, if we're using it, if dependence means the same kind of need as that, and it means the same thing as necessity, it doesn't capture the distinctions we're looking for, because I know there's a distinction here. But anyway, the point is like, it'll come down to clarifying the concept, I think.
Yeah, like it comes to be like about dependence. Like you are dependent on your mind to survive. We can phrase that, that's fine. I'm dependent on my mind. Right. Everyone is. am I dependent on someone else's mind
But who's the I
or
then?
not?
Like the mind is I, so I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I get that. But like, um, reason is what I depend on, I guess you could say. I depend on reason. I depend on that faculty, the faculty of reason. And I can't get away from it. And if, say, North Korea, like, just needed nuclear missiles, like, that's like dependency on others because, well, that's not a good example. I mean, that gets too much into other political questions. But as far
Right.
as like dependencies are usually requirements. So if
Right.
it's not required, then maybe by clarifying the concept, we can think of like, well, maybe there's clearer ways to say what we're thinking, which like we said, mutual dependence, not dependent, like mutual benefit, because that would capture the same
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. I think it is. It's definitely because you can. I think we had a discussion a while ago, and you brought up something about equivocation, and I think it is if the word refers to multiple concepts of different meaning, then it's easy to get stuck in that loop where you're like, well, it doesn't make sense. But there is, when you just look at the example, someone, if you work and let's simplify it, you're both farmers and you trade your carrots for the other person's grain and you get some grain. There's a difference between that and you're like, uh, you're a wanderer and you end up in the town and you're like, or in the farming area and you're like, well, I need bread, give me bread. Like, and you have nothing to offer. There's some actual distinction that is being captured. And I think it's down to the concept isn't clear in my head anyway.
Yeah.
All right, cool. We can just stop.
Yeah.